The doorbell rang at 11:14 on a Saturday morning. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, second cup of coffee going cold on the counter. Outside, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta does in October: gray sky, warm air, the smell of rain that never quite arrives. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. Marcus. 5 years, 3 months, and 11 days after he left. Standing on my porch in a wool coat I had never seen beside a young woman with long honey braids and a designer bag hanging off one shoulder. And next to her, holding her hand, a little boy. Maybe 3. Clutching a stuffed elephant, squinting up at the door like he was waiting to be let into somewhere that had always been his. I stood there for 4 seconds, counted them. Then I unlocked the door, pulled it open, and smiled at my husband like I'd been expecting him all along. Because in the 5 years Marcus spent building a new life, I had done something far more permanent. I had made sure there was nothing left here for him to come back to claim. He just didn't know that yet. What time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I met Marcus Holloway at a rooftop party in Midtown Atlanta on the 4th of July, 11 years ago. I wasn't supposed to be there. My friend Dana had dragged me out of my apartment after 3 weeks of overtime at the architecture firm where I was working as a junior associate, surviving on vending machine coffee. And the belief that if I stayed late enough, someone upstairs would eventually notice. I had flat shoes on, a dress I'd worn to a client presentation that same morning, and absolutely no intention of talking to anyone. Marcus was standing near the railing with a glass of bourbon, looking out at the skyline like he owned part of it. He was broad-shouldered and unhurried, with the kind of stillness that reads as confidence from a distance and something more complicated up close. He worked in private equity. He had a laugh that filled a room without trying. He looked at me like I was the most interesting thing on that roof, and at 27, I did not yet know how to be skeptical of that. We were married 18 months later in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Decatur. 40 guests. My mother cried. His mother gave a toast that was mostly about him. I wore my grandmother's earrings and a dress I had designed myself, cut from ivory silk with hand-stitched detailing along the collar. Marcus cried when he saw me walk down the aisle. Real tears. I remember thinking, this man loves me in a way I will never have to question. I was wrong about that. But not yet. The first 4 years were good, in the way that busy years are good full enough that you don't look too closely at the gaps. We bought the house on Tuxedo Road together, a red brick colonial with a wraparound porch and a backyard that needed work. I left the firm and started taking private commissions. Marcus traveled for work, New York, London, Dubai, and I learned to sleep in the middle of the bed and not mind the quiet. We talked about children the way people talk about a trip they keep meaning to book someday. When things slow down, things never slowed down. Looking back, the first real sign wasn't a fight or a lie I caught him in. It was a Tuesday night in February, about 8 months before he left. He came home later than usual, and instead of coming to find me in the study where I was working, he went straight to the guest room and closed the door. No explanation. In the morning, he was at the kitchen table, in a fresh shirt, reading his phone. And when I asked if everything was okay, he said, "Long week," and smiled at me over his coffee. I believed him. I made eggs. We sat across from each other at the table and talked about whether to refinish the hardwood floors. That was the last normal morning I remember. The distance grew in the way distance always does, so gradually that each individual day felt manageable, even ordinary. He stopped reaching for my hand in restaurants. He started taking calls in the car before coming inside. He was present in the house, the way furniture is present, occupying space, not filling it. I told myself it was work pressure. I told myself it was a season. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than the truth. 6 months later, he came to me on a Sunday evening while I was in the garden and told me he had accepted a long-term consulting position in London. 18 months, maybe 2 years. A firm he had been courting for a long time. An opportunity he couldn't pass up. He asked me to come with him. I couldn't. I had 3 clients mid-project. My mother's health was beginning to turn. The house, the life we had built here, brick by careful brick. He said he understood. He said it would go fast. He said we had done distance before and we were strong enough to do it again. He left on a Thursday morning in August, 1 rolling suitcase and a carry-on cab waiting in the driveway. He kissed me at the door, a real kiss, both hands on my face, and said, "I'll call you when I land." He called twice that first week, then once a week, then every few weeks. Then the calls started going to voicemail before I even heard it ring. By month 7, I had stopped counting the days between his messages. I had started doing something more useful with my time. But I didn't know yet what I was capable of. Not fully. Not until the morning I found out what Marcus had been doing over there and understood that the distance between us had never been about miles. It had been about a choice he made before he ever packed that bag. The first crack didn't come as a revelation. It came as a feeling I kept talking myself out of. It was a Wednesday evening in November, 14 months after Marcus left. I was sitting at my drafting table in the study, working on a commission for a family in Sandy Springs, a kitchen renovation. Nothing complicated, the kind of project I could do half asleep. The house was quiet. Outside rain was tapping against the windows in that slow, persistent way that makes Atlanta feel smaller than it is. I had a glass of red wine I hadn't touched, a space heater humming at my feet, and my phone face up on the corner of the desk. Marcus and I had spoken 4 days earlier. 11 minutes. He had seemed distracted answering my questions, in the half-second intervals of someone who was also reading something else. When I asked how he was sleeping, he said fine. When I asked about the project timeline, he said it was extending. When I asked when he thought he might come home, even just for a visit, he paused just long enough for me to notice before he said he wasn't sure yet. I told myself he was tired. I told myself London was expensive and time zones were exhausting, and long-distance marriages required patience, and I had patience. I had built an entire life on patience. What I didn't have was the ability to keep ignoring what my body already knew. That Wednesday night, just after 9, his name lit up my screen. Not a call, a notification. He had been tagged in a photo on the private Instagram account of someone named Sienna Voss. His location settings were still linked to my phone from a family plan we had never gotten around to separating. I had never searched for him. I had never needed to. But the algorithm, indifferent and precise, served it to me anyway. The photo was taken at a restaurant. Candlelit, intimate somewhere in Notting Hill based on the window detail behind them. Marcus was in a navy suit. I recognized I had packed it for him the morning he left. He was laughing, head tilted back the way he used to laugh at our kitchen table on Sunday mornings. His hand was on the back of Sienna's chair, not her shoulder close enough to be possessive without being obvious. She was leaning toward him, honey braids over one shoulder, a champagne glass raised in the direction of the camera. The caption said 6 months, still feels like a dream. I sat with that for a long time. I did not call him. I did not text. I did not throw the wine glass or put my fist through the drafting table or do any of the things that would have felt satisfying for 30 seconds and cost me everything after. I sat very still at my desk in the rain-quiet house, and I looked at that photograph until I had memorized every detail, the restaurant name visible on the matchbook at the edge of the table, the way his shoulders were relaxed. In a way they hadn't been around me in over a year, the small but unmistakable curve of Sienna's left hand resting on the tablecloth. She was wearing a ring. Not an engagement ring. A thin gold band on her left ring finger, identical in weight and style to the one Marcus had put on my hand 7 years earlier. I set my phone face down on the desk, picked up the wine, drank it slowly, And then I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I had been quietly building for the past 4 months: property listings, LLC registration documents, a spreadsheet of Marcus's known assets, and the name and direct line of the best real estate attorney in Fulton County. A woman named Patricia Osei, who came recommended by 3 different people who had all said the same thing. She is the one you want when the other side doesn't see you coming. I had not yet called Patricia. I had been telling myself I was gathering information, being thorough, not jumping to conclusions. That night, I understood I had not been gathering information. I had been waiting for permission to protect myself. The photograph was the permission. I called Patricia at 9:47 in the morning the next day. She picked up on the second ring. I told her my name, my situation, and what I wanted to do. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "How soon can you come in?" I said, "Tomorrow." She said, "Bring everything." I brought everything. And sitting across from Patricia Osei in her office on Peachtree Road, watching her read through 5 years of joint financial documents with the focused calm of someone who has seen worse and won anyway, something shifted in my chest. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter and more permanent than either. I had spent 14 months waiting for Marcus to come back to me. I was done waiting. What I did next, I did slowly, carefully, and without a single phone call to Marcus to warn him. That was the last mercy I gave him. Patricia Osei had a rule she told every new client on their first visit. She said it plainly, no preamble, the way someone states a fact about weather. Don't confront, don't warn, don't give him the chance to move anything before we do. She had a glass paperweight on her desk, shaped like the state of Georgia, and she tapped it once with one finger when she said it like punctuation. The moment he knows, you know the clock starts. We want that clock to start on our terms, not his. I nodded. I understood. I kept that rule for 8 months. Then Marcus broke it for me. It was a Tuesday in late March, 16 months after the photograph. I was at a job site in Buckhead, a full home renovation for a couple who had just relocated from Chicago. Real budget, good clients, the kind of project that had started to feel like evidence that my life was moving in a direction I had chosen. I was standing in the gutted kitchen reviewing tile samples when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. A text from Marcus. The first unsolicited message in 6 weeks. It said, "Leah, I need us to talk. It's about the house." I read it twice, put my phone back in my pocket, finished reviewing the tile samples, drove home, poured a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table in the house on Tuxedo Road, the house whose deed Patricia and I had spent the previous 4 months restructuring with the precision of people who understood exactly what was at stake. Then I called him. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had been waiting. He started with small talk. "How are you? How's your mother? How's work?" I let him go through all of it without helping him. I had learned by then that silence is a form of pressure most people cannot tolerate for long, and Marcus had never been comfortable with quiet. After about 90 seconds, he stopped the small talk and said, "I need to be honest with you about some things." I said, "Okay." He told me about Sienna. He framed it carefully. They had met through work. It had started as nothing he hadn't meant for it to become what it became. He used the word situation 4 times. He did not use the word love. He said he knew this was painful, and he was sorry for the way it had happened, and he wanted to handle things with respect. I said, "That's good to hear." He paused. Then he said, "There's also a child, a son. He's almost 2. I already knew this. I had known for 7 months. Patricia had a private investigator she worked with on cases like mine, a quiet man named Dwight, who sent reports in plain manila envelopes and never called unless he had something that mattered. Dwight had sent me 3 envelopes. I had read every page of all 3, but Marcus didn't know what I knew. So I let the silence stretch. He filled it. I think we need to talk about the house, about how we divide things going forward. I want this to be fair, Leah. I do. Fair. He said it with the particular confidence of a man who believes he is the one who will be doing the dividing. I looked around the kitchen, the refinished hardwood floors I had chosen, the cabinet hardware I had installed myself on a rainy Sunday, the window above the sink that looked out over the backyard. I had landscaped one section at a time over 3 years because Marcus had always said we'd hire someone, and we never did. I said, "I think that's a good idea, Marcus. Why don't you come home and we can sit down together?" He said, Yeah, I think that's right." I was thinking maybe in a few weeks. I said, "Whenever works for you." He said he'd be in touch to arrange it. He said thank you. He said I was handling this with a lot of grace. I said, "I've had time to think." We hung up. I sat at the table for another minute. Then I picked up my phone and called Patricia. She answered before the second ring. I said, "He's coming." She said, "Good. How long do we have?" I said, "A few weeks, maybe less." She said, "That's enough. I'll have everything ready." I said, "He mentioned the house first thing." There was a brief pause. Then Patricia made a sound, not quite a laugh, something smaller and more controlled. "Of course he did," she said. "They always do." I hung up, refilled my water glass, and went back to the renovation drawings spread across my kitchen table. I had a deadline. I had 3 other properties under review. I had a meeting Thursday morning with a developer in West Midtown who wanted to discuss a long-term partnership. I had a life so full by then that Marcus's return barely fit inside it. He just hadn't arrived yet to find that out. There is a particular kind of stillness that comes after a decision has been made. Not peace exactly, not relief. Something more like the way a room feels after you've rearranged the furniture, the same walls, the same light, but the space has a different logic now, and your body is still learning where everything is. That was how I moved through the 6 weeks between Marcus's phone call and his return. Quietly, deliberately, without the noise of reaction. My mother noticed first. She called on a Thursday evening the way she always did from the landline, in her house in Cascade Heights, and somewhere in the middle of our conversation, she stopped and said, "Leah, what's happening with you? You sound different." I said, "Different how?" She said, "Settled, like you've stopped arguing with something." I didn't tell her everything that night. I told her Marcus was coming home, and that we were going to have a conversation about the future, and that I was handling it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You don't sound like a woman who needs to handle something. You sound like a woman who already has." She wasn't wrong. The weeks moved in a steady rhythm. Mornings I was up by 5:30, coffee made at my desk by 6. I had taken on 2 new commissions in January, a commercial renovation in Old Fourth Ward, and a full residential build in Smyrna for a couple who had found me through a referral from the Chicago clients. The work was good, dense and specific, and requiring enough concentration that it kept the quieter parts of my mind occupied. In the afternoons between site visits, I met with Patricia. We went through everything with the patience of people who understood that precision now was protection later. The Tuxedo Road property had been transferred into Leah Holloway Design Holdings, LLC, 14 months earlier, a company I had incorporated with Patricia's guidance, funded initially with my own commissions, and later with the proceeds from a small investment property in East Atlanta that I had purchased 9 months after Marcus left. The East Atlanta property had been a risk. A 2-unit rental that needed work priced below market because the previous owner had let the maintenance slide. I had done much of the cosmetic work myself on weekends, learned more about load-bearing walls than I ever expected, and rented both units within 3 weeks of listing. That property had since appreciated 31%. It had also taught me something Marcus had never understood about me, that I was not, as he had once said during an argument in our 4th year of marriage, too cautious to take real risks. I was selective. There is a difference. By the time Marcus called to say he had booked his flight a Sunday evening, almost 5 weeks after our first conversation, the company held the Tuxedo Roadhouse, the East Atlanta duplex, and partial interest in 2 additional properties in the West End that I had acquired through the partnership with a developer from West Midtown. On paper, Leah Holloway Design Holdings LLC was a mid-sized real estate and design firm with 4 assets, 2 active development partnerships, and a net worth that would have surprised everyone who had watched me sit quietly in this house for the first year after Marcus left and assumed I was waiting to be rescued. I was not waiting to be rescued. I was reading every book Patricia recommended. I was meeting with accountants and title attorneys and sitting in on closings I didn't need to attend just to understand how the room worked. I was learning with the focused intensity of someone who understands that knowledge is the only thing no one can take back exactly how property law worked in the state of Georgia, what a post-nuptial agreement could and could not do, and precisely what Marcus's legal claim to anything in my portfolio actually amounted to. Patricia told me the answer to that last question at our 3rd meeting, sliding a single page across the desk and letting me read it myself before she said anything. I read it twice. Then I looked up at her. She said, "He would need to prove direct financial contribution to any asset held by the LLC. Given the timeline of incorporation and his absence," I said, "he has no claim." She said, "Not a viable one, no." I folded the page neatly along its center crease and set it back on her desk. I said, "Good." That was a Tuesday in April. Marcus landed at Hartsfield-Jackson on a Friday morning 3 weeks later. He texted me from the gate. "Just landed. See you soon." I was on a site visit in Buckhead when the message came through. I read it standing in a half-finished living room afternoon light, coming through frameless window openings, the smell of fresh drywall, and cut lumber around me. One of my contractors was waiting for a decision on ceiling height. I made the decision, finished. The walkthrough drove home, changed into a clean shirt, and put a pot of coffee on. I did not check my hair. I did not rehearse anything to say. I did not feel in the hours before Marcus arrived on my porch with his new family anything that resembled fear. What I felt was something closer to curiosity. The clean, impersonal kind. The kind you feel when you already know how a story ends and you're watching someone else catch up to the last page. The doorbell rang at 11:14. I already told you what happened next. What I haven't told you yet is what happened after I smiled. I stepped back from the door and let them in. Not because I wanted them inside my house, because I needed Marcus to believe for just a little while longer that he still had standing to be there, that this was still a conversation between equals, that the woman he had left on this porch 5 years ago was the same woman now holding the door open. Let him believe that. Let him walk in confident. Confidence makes people careless. Marcus came in first, that familiar broad-shouldered ease, looking around the entryway the way people look at a place they expect to recognize and are slightly unsettled to find improved. The floors were refinished. The lighting was different, warm and deliberate, a designer fixture I had sourced from a showroom in Miami. The art on the walls was new, all of it chosen, nothing random. He clocked all of it without commenting, which meant he noticed. Sienna followed with the little boy on her hip. The designer bag shifted to one shoulder, her eyes moving around the room the way someone's eyes move when they are trying to assess what they are walking into. She was younger up close than in the photograph, 28, maybe 29, and she had the particular wariness of a woman who has not yet decided whether to be polite or territorial. I smiled at her directly and said, "Come in, coffee's on." She said thank you. Her voice was careful. The little boy looked at me with the uncomplicated curiosity of a child who does not yet understand what a room full of adults is really saying. He had Marcus's eyes. I registered that and set it down and did not pick it up again. We sat in the living room, Marcus and Sienna on the sofa, me in the chair across from them, the coffee table between us, like a negotiating table neither of us had named yet. I had not offered the formal sitting room. I had chosen this room deliberately comfortable mine in every detail, not a single object in it that Marcus had selected or paid for. Marcus started the way he always started difficult conversations, with a wide preparatory breath and a look of practiced sincerity. He said, "Leah, I know this is a lot, and I want you to know that I meant what I said on the phone. I want to handle this the right way." I said, "I appreciate that." He said, "Sienna and I were planning to stay in Atlanta, permanently. I've been in talks with a firm here, and it looks like it's going to come through. We need to get settled, get Elijah into a school." He glanced at the little boy, then back at me. "And I think the first step is figuring out the house situation." I said, "The house situation." He said, "The property, how we split things. I know we never formally, I know the paperwork hasn't been handled, and I want to be fair, Leah, I do. But I also have a family now, and I need to make sure they're taken care of." I looked at him for a moment. I thought about the Tuesday night in November 3 years ago when I had sat at this same table and looked at a photograph of this man laughing in a restaurant in Notting Hill with his hand on the back of Sienna's chair, and understood in one clean, irreversible instant exactly who he was. I thought about Patricia's office, the manila envelopes from Dwight, the 14-hour days, the East Atlanta duplex, the LLC documents, the 4 properties, the developer partnership, the accountant who had told me 6 months ago, without drama, that I had built something real. Marcus said, "I was thinking we could start with a number, something that works for both of us. Give you enough to get set up somewhere else and let us get the kids into a routine." I said, "Somewhere else?" He said, "I just mean this house is big for one person, Leah. And with Elijah," I said, "Marcus." He stopped. I said, "Who do you think owns this house?" He blinked. "We do, jointly. It's in both our—" "It's not," I said. "Not loud, not sharp, the way you correct a small factual error in a meeting. It hasn't been for 14 months. He stared at me. I picked up my coffee, drank it, set it down. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "The property was transferred into a corporate entity 14 months ago, a company I own. The transfer was legal, properly documented, and recorded with Fulton County. You were not a financial contributor to the transfer or to any subsequent asset under the company's ownership." I paused. "Patricia Osei is my attorney. Her number is on the business card on the counter if you'd like to have your representation call her directly." The room went very quiet. Sienna had stopped looking around the room. She was looking at Marcus. Marcus said, "Leah." I said, "You mentioned you have a family to take care of." "I think that's right. I think you should focus on that," he said. "You can't just, that's marital property. There are laws." I said, "There are. Patricia knows all of them." He said my name again differently this time. The confidence was gone. What was underneath it was something older and less rehearsed. I looked at him steadily, and I felt nothing that resembled guilt. What I felt was the specific grounded satisfaction of a woman who had spent 5 years being underestimated by the one person who should have known better. He had come back to divide what was mine. He was about to find out there was nothing left to divide. And this, what happened in my living room on a Saturday morning over coffee, was only the beginning of what Marcus Holloway was going to lose. Marcus left the house that Saturday without the conversation he had come for. He stood up from the sofa slowly, the way people stand when their legs have gone uncertain under them, and said he needed time to think. Sienna was already reaching for the diaper bag, her face closed off in the careful way of someone recalculating. Elijah had fallen asleep against her shoulder, the stuffed elephant tucked under one small arm, indifferent to all of it. At the door, Marcus turned back and looked at me. He said, "This isn't over, Leah." I said, "I know. Patricia's office opens Monday at 8. He left. I closed the door, stood in the entryway for a moment, then went to the kitchen and washed the coffee cups. All 3 of them. By hand. Slowly. Patricia called me that evening. Marcus's attorney, a man named Gerald Webb, who Patricia described as competent but overconfident, had already been in touch. Marcus had wasted no time. He was claiming the house transfer had been made without his knowledge or consent during an active marriage, and therefore constituted a fraudulent conveyance. He wanted the transfer reversed. He wanted full joint access to the property while the matter was under legal review. Patricia listened to all of this, and then, according to her, said, "Send me everything you have." She called me after to explain what was coming. "He's going to push hard on the marital asset argument," she said. "It's the only angle he has. We're going to need to show the timeline clearly when the LLC was formed, what funded it, how the transfer was structured. You kept everything." I said, "Every receipt, every contract, every wire confirmation." She said, "Good, because here is what Gerald Webb does not know yet." She paused the way she always paused, before something that mattered. The house was not the only thing transferred into the LLC. "No," I said. "Walk me through the full picture for the filing." I pulled up the folder on my laptop, the one I had been building since that November night 3 years ago, organized with the thoroughness of someone who understood that paperwork is armor, and I walked her through it. Leah Holloway Design Holdings LLC had been incorporated 26 months earlier with an initial capitalization of $47,000. Every cent of that $47,000 had come from my design commission's client payments made to my sole proprietorship in the 20 months after Marcus left. Deposited into a business account in my name alone, with corresponding invoices, contracts, and tax filings that predated the LLC by over a year. Marcus had not contributed a single dollar to its formation. He had not been present in the state of Georgia for any of the company's operational history. He had not signed a lease, a contract, or a check on behalf of any asset the company held. The Tuxedo Roadhouse had been transferred in at an appraised value of $840,000, with a corresponding mortgage assumption handled through the LLC. The East Atlanta duplex, purchased for $212,000, currently valued at $276,000, had been acquired 11 months after Marcus left, funded entirely by my commissions and a small business loan in the company's name. The 2 West End properties had been acquired through a development partnership agreement signed 8 months ago, with my contribution coming from the duplex's equity line. Total portfolio value, at last appraisal, just over $2.1 million. Marcus's legal claim to any of it. A theory that required proving I had acted fraudulently in bad faith during an active marriage. A claim that would need to survive the documentation I had just described to Patricia, along with the 5-year gap during which my husband had been living in London with another woman and a child he had not disclosed. Patricia was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Leah, does Marcus know about the West End properties?" I said, "No." She said, "Does he know about the development partnership?" I said, "No." She said, "Does he have any idea what the portfolio is actually worth?" I said, "He came back here thinking I was living in the house we bought together and doing small commissions. He came back thinking I was the woman he left." Patricia said, "And Gerald Webb is going to walk into my office on Monday morning thinking the same thing." I said, "Yes." She made that sound again, the one that wasn't quite a laugh. Then she said, "I'll have the full asset disclosure ready for the filing. All of it. Every property, every valuation, every formation document. We're not going to hide anything. We're going to show them exactly what you built on the record in the light." I said, "Good." She said, "When Gerald sees the full picture, he's going to advise Marcus to settle." I said, "And if Marcus doesn't listen to Gerald?" She said, "Then we go to court and a judge sees the full picture instead. Either way, the outcome is the same." A pause. "But Leah, there's one more thing I need to tell you. Something Dwight found last week that I've been waiting to discuss in person. Can you come in tomorrow morning?" I said yes. I sat at my kitchen table after we hung up laptop, still open the folder of documents still on screen. Outside, Atlanta was going dark, the kind of deep blue October evening that makes the lit windows of houses look like small, warm arguments against the night. I thought about Marcus standing at my door that morning. The wool coat, the practiced sincerity, the way he had said somewhere else, like it was a reasonable thing. Like he had done the math on my life and arrived at a number he was comfortable offering me. He had spent 5 years abroad building what he thought was leverage. He had come home to find I had spent 5 years building something he hadn't thought to account for. Monday morning, Patricia was going to hand Gerald Webb a document. Gerald Webb was going to read it. And Marcus Holloway was going to understand for the first time that the woman he had underestimated was not a chapter in his story. She was the author of her own. Patricia's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building on Peachtree Road, with a view of Buckhead that on clear mornings looked like a promise Atlanta was making to itself. I arrived at 8:15 on Monday. Patricia was already at her desk jacket on a legal pad in front of her, covered in her precise, compressed handwriting. She had a second coffee waiting for me on the side table without my asking. That was the thing about Patricia. She paid attention to what people needed before they said it out loud. It was what made her good at her job, and I suspected formidable in almost every other room she walked into. She told me what Dwight had found. Marcus's London consulting firm, the one he had cited when he left the one he had used as the architecture of his entire explanation, had dissolved 14 months ago. Not restructured, not relocated. Dissolved with outstanding creditor claims and an ongoing review by the UK Financial Conduct Authority related to undisclosed investment losses. Marcus had not been a consultant. He had been a partner. A minority partner, but a partner, which meant his name was attached to the firm's liabilities in a way that a consulting arrangement would not have been. He had come back to Atlanta not just to claim the house. He had come back because he needed it. The London money was gone. The firm was gone. Whatever he had built over there, the confidence, the new family, the life he had chosen over mine, was sitting on a foundation that had been crumbling for over a year. And he had walked into my living room on a Saturday morning, looked at the home I had rebuilt and expanded, and turned into the cornerstone of a $2 million portfolio, and told me I should think about moving somewhere else. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I said, "How exposed is he?" Patricia said, "Personally significantly. The FCA review is civil, not criminal at this stage. But the creditor claims are real, and they'll follow him here. His U.S. assets, whatever he has, are going to be visible." I said, "What does he have?" She slid a page across the desk. Dwight's work clean and thorough as always. Marcus had a personal checking account with a balance just under $19,000. A retirement account he had not contributed to in 3 years. A leased Range Rover that Sienna drove. No property in his name. No U.S.-based investments. The London apartment had been rented. The firm's assets were frozen pending the FCA review. He had come home to divide mine because he had nothing left of his own. I folded the page, put it in my bag. I said, When does Gerald Webb arrive? Patricia looked at her watch. 20 minutes. I said, I want to be in the room. She looked at me. You don't have to be. I said, I know. I want to be. Gerald Webb arrived at 8:45. A tall man in his late 50s, silver-haired with the particular ease of someone accustomed to walking into rooms and being the most prepared person in them. He had a leather portfolio under his arm and a handshake that lasted half a second too long. He glanced at me when Patricia introduced me, then back at Patricia recalibrating. Marcus was not with him. That told me something. We sat at the round table in Patricia's conference room, the Buckhead skyline behind us. Morning light coming in clean and direct. Gerald opened with the fraudulent conveyance argument measured and thorough, citing 3 Georgia precedents. He was good. I gave him that. He built the case for Marcus's claim methodically, never raising his voice, keeping his eyes on Patricia with the professional courtesy of someone who is not yet taking the opposing party seriously. Patricia let him finish. Then, she opened her folder and slid the first document across the table. Gerald looked at it. His expression did not change immediately. He was trained too well for that. But his eyes moved more slowly across the second page than they had across the first. She slid the second document, then the third. By the fourth, the full portfolio valuation. 2.1 million every asset itemized with formation dates and funding sources. Gerald Webb set his pen down on the table. Patricia said, As you can see, every asset held by Leah Holloway Design Holdings, LLC was funded exclusively by Miss Holloway's independent income during the period of her husband's absence. There is no marital contribution to any LLC asset. The fraudulent conveyance argument requires demonstrating intent to defraud a creditor or spouse with an existing legal claim. Mr. Holloway had no legal claim to independently acquired business assets at the time of any transfer. She paused. Additionally, given the current status of his former London partnership and the associated FCA review, any counter-litigation he pursues will put his own financial history into the public record. Gerald was quiet. I looked at him across the table. I had not spoken since we sat down. He looked back at me for the first time since the meeting started. Really looked. The recalibration completed itself somewhere behind his eyes. He said, I'll need to consult with my client. Patricia said, Of course. He gathered his documents, stood, buttoned his jacket with the careful movements of a man buying himself time to think. At the door, he paused and looked at Patricia. He said, The portfolio. When was the last valuation? Patricia said, 8 weeks ago. He nodded once, slowly, the way people nod when they are absorbing something they did not expect to have to absorb. Then he left. The room was quiet. Outside, Atlanta was fully awake now, the Peachtree traffic moving in both directions, 14 floors below us. Patricia picked up her coffee. I picked up mine. She said, Gerald is going to call Marcus in the next 2 hours. I said, What will he tell him? She said the truth, that the woman he left is worth more than he ever accounted for, and that the only move left is to walk away clean. I looked out at the skyline. I thought about Marcus in whatever hotel room he was sitting in, right now waiting for his attorney to call, still believing even now, even after Saturday, that there was something here to negotiate. He was about to find out that the negotiation had ended before he ever landed at Hartsfield-Jackson. I had not built a $2 million portfolio to share it. I had built it to make sharing unnecessary. Gerald Webb called Patricia at 11:47 that same Monday morning. Patricia was in a client meeting when he called. Her assistant took the message and slid it under the conference room door on a folded note. Patricia glanced at it, finished her meeting, and called me before she called Gerald back. She said, He wants to talk settlement. I said, Already. She said, "Gerald is good at his job." He read the room. I said, "What does Marcus want?" She said, "Gerald didn't say what Marcus wants. He said Marcus needs to talk. There's a difference." A pause. "I think the London situation is moving faster than Marcus expected. Dwight sent me something this morning. One of the FCA creditors has retained a U.S. attorney. I was at a job site in Smyrna when she called, standing in a half-finished master bathroom, afternoon light coming through a frameless window opening. I walked outside to the porch away from the contractor noise. I said, 'They can come after U.S. assets.' She said, 'If they establish jurisdiction.' It's not guaranteed, but it's not theoretical either. Marcus's name is on those liability documents in London. If a creditor pursues it here and he has no assets." I said, "They look at marital assets." She said, "They look at everything," which is why Gerald wants to settle the divorce quickly and cleanly. A finalized settlement establishes what is and isn't Marcus's. It protects him from the appearance of hidden assets. Another pause. It also, incidentally, protects you. A clean divorce decree with a full asset disclosure closes the door on any future claim that marital property was concealed. I understood what she was saying. Marcus needed this settled as much as I did. Possibly more. I said, "Set the meeting." Patricia arranged it for Thursday morning. Neutral ground, a conference room at a law firm in Midtown that neither of us used, the kind of beige, windowless space designed to make everyone equally uncomfortable and therefore equally motivated to finish. I wore a charcoal blazer over a white shirt. No jewelry except my grandmother's earrings. The gold band was still on the chain around my neck, tucked inside my collar where it had been for 4 years. I had not decided yet what to do with it. Marcus arrived with Gerald. He looked like he had not slept well. The expensive watch was still on his wrist, but he had stopped glancing at it. He sat down across from me, and for a long moment he just looked at me the way people look at something they are trying to reconcile with a version they held in their memory. I looked back at him steadily and waited. Gerald opened the meeting. Patricia responded. The language was formal and procedural, the careful architecture of legal negotiation. And underneath it, the actual conversation was simple. Marcus had nothing to offer, and he knew it. But Marcus, and this was the thing about Marcus that had always been true. The thing I had loved first and understood last, Marcus could not help himself. 20 minutes into the meeting, he leaned forward and looked at me directly past Gerald, past Patricia, and said, "Leah, can we just for a minute? Can we just talk, you and me?" Gerald put a hand on his arm. Marcus ignored it. He said, "I know I don't have a legal claim. I understand that now. But we were married for 7 years. We built something together. This house, this life, I was part of that. And I know I left. I know I handled things badly. But you have to understand the situation in London. It got complicated, and I made mistakes, and I'm not in a good place right now, Leah. I said, "Marcus." He stopped. I said, "What do you need?" He said, "I need to know you're not going to let me drown." The room was very quiet. I looked at this man I had loved for 11 years, the man who had cried at our wedding, who had come home late one Tuesday and gone to the guest room and closed the door, and in doing so had started a chain of events that had led us both here to a beige conference room in Midtown Atlanta, negotiating the formal end of something that had actually ended years ago on a restaurant patio in Notting Hill. I said, "I'm not going to let you drown." Gerald looked up sharply. I said, "But I'm also not going to throw you a rope from my own portfolio. What I'm going to do is sign the papers that give you a clean exit. No claims against me. No claims against the LLC. No revisiting this in 6 months when the London creditors get organized. You walk away with your retirement account, your personal checking, and a divorce decree that's clean enough to protect you." He said, That's it, I said. That's everything. Given where you're standing, Marcus, that is not nothing. He looked at me for a long time. Then he looked at Gerald. Gerald gave him the smallest nod. Marcus turned back to me. Something shifted in his face, the last of the confidence, the residue of the man who had walked onto my porch on Saturday morning, expecting to divide my life into a number. It left quietly the way things leave when they have been gone for a long time anyway, and the body is only just catching up, he said. Okay. Patricia had the preliminary documents ready that afternoon. But what happened next had nothing to do with paperwork, because at 3:17 that same Thursday, while Marcus and Gerald were still in a separate room reviewing the draft settlement terms, my phone buzzed on the conference table. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It said, "This is Sienna. I know this isn't appropriate. I need to talk to you. Not about the settlement, about Marcus, about what he's been telling me about you, about what he's been telling me about the money. Please." I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the table and looked at the middle distance for a moment. Then I picked it back up and typed, "Tomorrow. Coffee. You choose the place." She replied in under a minute with the name of a cafe in Virginia Highland. I put my phone away and went back to reviewing Patricia's documents. Marcus thought the worst thing he was going to face this week was a settlement meeting. He had not accounted for what happened when the two women he had been managing separately decided to compare notes. The cafe Sienna chose was a small place on North Highland Avenue, with exposed brick walls and windows that fogged at the edges in the October cold. I arrived first, ordered a black coffee, took a table near the back where the noise from the counter would give us enough cover without making us conspicuous. I had told Patricia about the text that morning. She had listened without interrupting and then said, "Be careful, this could be strategy." I said I understood. She said, "I mean his strategy, not hers." I thought about that on the drive over. Sienna arrived 8 minutes late. Honey braids pulled back a camel coat that was slightly too thin for the weather, the designer bag on her shoulder, but unzipped, now distracted. She looked younger, without the defensive alertness she had worn in my living room on Saturday. She looked specifically like someone who had spent several nights not sleeping and had run out of the energy required to pretend otherwise. She sat down, ordered nothing, put both hands flat on the table. She said, "Thank you for coming." I said, "You said it wasn't about the settlement." She said, "It's not." A breath. "Marcus told me you were struggling. Before he left, I mean. That the marriage was already over. That you had been living separately in the house for almost a year before he took the London position. That you had agreed between the two of you that it was done." I said, "That's not true." She looked at me. "I know that now." She said Marcus had told her I was aware of their relationship within the first 6 months. That I had been informed and had chosen not to pursue divorce because I wanted to keep the house and the lifestyle. That I was in his word, comfortable, financially dependent, not particularly motivated to formalize, anything content to let things drift, while he supported me from abroad. I listened to all of this without speaking. When she finished, I said, "Did he tell you he stopped calling me after month 7? She said, "He said you had stopped answering." I said, "Did he tell you about the retirement account he stopped contributing to the joint account he stopped depositing into the property tax on the Tuxedo Roadhouse that I paid alone for 4 consecutive years?" She was quiet. I said, "Did he tell you that the London firm dissolved 14 months ago? That there are creditors with a U.S. attorney, that the Range Rover you drive is leased, and the lease is 3 months behind?" The color shifted in her face. I said, I'm not telling you this to hurt you. I'm telling you because you texted me. And I think you texted me because somewhere in the last 5 days, you started doing the math, and the numbers stopped adding up." She looked down at the table. Her hands were still flat on the surface, but the fingers had tightened. She said, "He told me we were going to use the settlement money to get an apartment, that you were going to give him a buyout." I said, "There is no buyout. There is nothing to buy out. He has $19,000 in a checking account and a retirement fund he hasn't touched in 3 years. She said, "He said the house." I said, "The house is mine, fully legally documented and finalized. There was never going to be settlement money, Sienna. He came back here believing he could walk into my life and divide it. He was wrong. And I think he told you what he needed to tell you to keep you on the plane with him." She was silent for a long time. Outside on North Highland, a delivery truck was blocking the bike lane, and someone was honking the ordinary noise of a city moving through its Thursday. Inside the cafe, 2 women sat across from each other at a small table and held the weight of what a man's dishonesty looked like when it finally had to exist in one room. Sienna said, "What am I supposed to do?" I said, "I don't know. That's not mine to answer." She said, "I have a 2-year-old. I left my family in Houston to come here." I said, "I know. I'm sorry that happened to you." And I was. Not in a way that softened anything or changed any of the decisions I had made or would make, but in the clean human way that one woman can be sorry for what another woman has been put through by someone they both in different ways and different seasons had trusted. Sienna looked at me with an expression I recognized. Not anger. Not grief, exactly. The particular look of someone who is revising a story they had already memorized and finding the revision worse than the original. She said, "He talked about you sometimes, in London. He said you were too careful, too controlled, that you never took risks." I said, "What do you think now?" She looked around the cafe, back at me, at the charcoal blazer and the grandmother's earrings, and the woman sitting across from her, who had just described a $2 million portfolio funded entirely in the 5 years her husband was away. She said, "I think he was describing himself." I picked up my coffee, finished it. I said, "Marcus is going to sign the settlement papers today or tomorrow. After that, what he does and doesn't have is going to be visible. I'd suggest you talk to someone your own attorney, not his, before that happens." She said, "I can't afford." I reached into my bag, took out a card, slid it across the table. She looked at it. It had a name and number written on the back in my handwriting. I said, "She does family law. She's not Patricia's price range. Tell her I sent you." Sienna picked up the card, held it carefully the way people hold things they are not sure they deserve. She said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Because you have a 2-year-old, and because Marcus put both of us in a position we didn't ask for. That's not your fault any more than it was mine." I stood up, put on my coat. She said, "Leah." I looked at her. She said, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry, for my part in it. I didn't know everything, but I knew some things, and I chose not to look too hard." I looked at her for a moment. I said, "That's the most honest thing anyone has said to me in this entire situation." I left a 20 on the table for the coffee and walked out into the cold October air on North Highland Avenue. The city moving around me in every direction, unhurried and indifferent and fully alive. Marcus signed the settlement papers that Friday at 4 in the afternoon. By the following Tuesday, his Range Rover was gone from the hotel parking lot where Dwight had last logged it. By the end of the month, his number went to a different area code when I tested it. Not blocked, just gone. Relocated probably. Houston maybe. Somewhere Sienna's family was. Or somewhere new entirely, the way Marcus had always moved toward whatever he believed was waiting for him just past the current horizon. I did not follow the story past that point. I had my own story to get back to, and it was just beginning. 3 months after Marcus signed the settlement papers, I bought a fifth property. It was a mixed-use building on the west side of Atlanta, ground-floor commercial, 2 residential units, above a rooftop terrace that needed work but had a view of the downtown skyline that on clear evenings looked like something worth preserving. The previous owner had held it for 20 years and priced it with the particular sentimentality of someone who loved a thing but could no longer carry it. I paid fairly. We closed on a Wednesday morning in January, and Patricia was there. And my accountant Raymond was there. And afterward we went to a restaurant on West Side Provisions and ordered good wine and sat in a booth by the window and talked about nothing important for 2 hours. It was the best afternoon I had had in years. I drove home on North Side Drive with the radio off, the city going dark around me, the kind of January evening in Atlanta that feels more like late autumn than winter cool. And dry the bare trees along the road, making clean lines against the orange sky. I turned onto Tuxedo Road and pulled into the driveway of the house that had once been ours, and was now unambiguously and entirely mine. I sat in the car for a moment before going in. I thought about the woman I had been the morning Marcus left. Standing at this same door, watching a cab pull away, telling myself the distance was temporary and the foundation was solid and strong marriages survived hard seasons. I had believed all of it. I had not been naive. I had been faithful, which is a different thing. And it had cost me in the way that faithfulness sometimes costs when it is not returned in kind. But here is what I had learned in the years since. The cost was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different one. I had not planned to become a woman who built companies. I had not woken up the morning after Marcus left with a strategy or a vision or a clear sense of what I was capable of. I had woken up with a migraine and an empty house and a commission for a kitchen renovation in Sandy Springs that was due in 2 weeks. I had made coffee and sat at my drafting table and done the work in front of me. And then the next day, I had done the same. And the day after that. The portfolio had not been built on a plan. It had been built on consistency, the particular unglamorous power of showing up every single day and making the next right decision, even when the next right decision was small. Especially when it was small. The East Atlanta duplex had started as a distraction. Something to think about, that wasn't Marcus. I had driven past it on a Sunday because Dwight's first envelope had arrived the day before, and I had needed to be in a car moving through the city. And I had seen the for sale sign and pulled over on instinct. I had walked through it with a flashlight because the power had been cut, made notes on my phone, and called a contractor friend that evening. 6 weeks later, I owned it. That was how it had started. Patricia once said to me near the end of the settlement negotiations that what impressed her most was not the portfolio itself, but the documentation, the receipts, the contracts, the dated wire confirmations, the organized, meticulous paper trail of a woman who had understood without anyone telling her that the record of a thing is as important as the thing itself. I told her I'd learned it from watching what happened when records didn't exist. I had watched Marcus operate on confidence alone for 7 years, the charm, the ease, the absolute certainty that things would work out because they always had. He had built a life on the assumption that the room would keep rearranging itself around him. And for a long time it had. Until London. Until the firm. Until he came back to Atlanta and knocked on a door he no longer had a key to, and discovered that in his absence, the room had finished rearranging itself without him. I did not feel triumphant about that. What I felt was something quieter, kind of completion. I thought about Sienna. I had heard through a mutual acquaintance. Patricia knew that she had gone back to Houston in November, that she was with her family, that she had used the attorney's name on the card. I hoped the attorney had been helpful. I hoped Elijah was in a good school. I hoped Sienna was doing the thing I had done, the quiet, unglamorous daily work of building something that belonged entirely to her. I thought about my mother, who had called me on a Sunday in November, the week after Marcus left for the last time, and said simply, "Tell me everything." And I had. For 2 hours on the phone, I had told her everything. The photograph, the LLC Patricia Dwight, the duplex, the settlement, the cafe on North Highland, all of it in order from the beginning. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother would have understood every single decision you made." I said, "I know." She said, "So do I." I reached up and touched the chain around my neck. The gold band was still there. I held it between my fingers for a moment in the dark of the car, the way I had done 100 times in the last 5 years, without quite deciding what to do with it. Then I unclasped the chain, held the ring in my palm. It was small and plain, and well made, the kind of ring bought by a young man who meant it at the time. I believed he had meant it. I believed that was true, and also that it had not been enough. And also that both things could be true simultaneously without either one canceling the other out. I set the ring in the cup holder, got out of the car, went inside. The house was warm and quiet, the way I'd learned to love it. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, kicked off my shoes, and walked to the kitchen in bare feet on the refinished hardwood floors I had chosen, past the art I had selected, past the window above the sink that looked out over the garden I had planted one section at a time. I put the kettle on, stood at the counter while it heated, looked at the room around me, the clean lines, the warm light, the specific and accumulated evidence of a life built deliberately, one decision at a time, by a woman who had been left and had chosen, instead of waiting to be found, to go looking for herself. I had found her. She was here, in this house, in this company, in the 5th property closing that morning and the 6th one Patricia was already reviewing, and the development partnership that was expanding in the spring. She was here, and she was not waiting for anything. The kettle clicked off. I made tea, took it to the study, opened my laptop. I had work to do. There is a version of this story where I fall apart the night Marcus left and never quite put myself back together. I know that version. I lived inside it for 14 months. I know what it feels like to sit on a kitchen floor at 2 in the morning and not remember why you're supposed to get up. But here is what I learned slowly and without anyone handing it to me. The floor is not the end. The floor is just information. It's telling you that something has to change. Not tomorrow, not when you feel ready, but now, starting with the next small decision in front of you. You don't build a new life in a single moment of determination. You build it in the 1,000 ordinary moments after the commission you take when you don't feel like it, the attorney you call when you'd rather stay in bed, the property you walk through with a flashlight, because something in you recognizes a foundation worth saving. If someone has underestimated you, that is painful. But it is also, if you choose to use it correctly, the most clarifying thing that can happen to you. It shows you exactly who you are when the person who was supposed to see you clearly couldn't be bothered to look. You don't have to be angry. You don't have to be bitter. You just have to be consistent. Build the thing. Keep the records. Know your worth down to the last documented dollar. And when they come back, because sometimes they come back, make sure you're standing at a door they no longer have a key to. If this story found you at the right moment, leave a comment. Tell me where you are and what you're building. And if you're not building yet, start tomorrow. Start with the next small thing. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one. I'll be here.